Earthworks Jacks, providing lawn maintenance, fertilization, and pest control throughout Northeast Florida. Hey everyone, Chad with Earthworks. I'm back at Nichols with Jason. We want to go over a few different things this week. Last time we covered mowers. This time we're going to focus more on the two-cycle side of things. Most people, when they think of two-cycle stuff, you think it's pretty simple. You know, you just have two-cycle oil and gas, you mix it, you go. But there's actually a lot of things that you can do in the way of maintenance, and then there's very specific things on how you run it. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Jason now and let him focus more on some of those things.
Sure. Thanks, Chad. So like you say, it seems like a simple engine, and really it is, because there's no valves, there's no oil pan. All the lubrication from a two-stroke comes from the fuel mix that you put in there. So when I talk about engine life of a two-stroke, that's where I like to start, is making sure you're using a good quality two-cycle mix, and that you're mixing it appropriately. Not too much, not under. Some people like to modify it. There's a reason why they've spent all that money researching the right amount of oil. Some people say, oh, I want to add more. That actually does damage as well. So this here is actually a piston that's been damaged, mostly from a lean running condition.
Yep.
There's a lot of things that could cause a lean running condition, but the first one we assume is not the proper oil mix, or if you didn't put oil in it at all. So there's damage all over this piston here, and it's because it didn't have lubrication. It was essentially metal on metal, because gas by itself does not provide lubrication.
Right. Now, is it either, is it running too lean? Is it running the wrong type, the wrong one?
It could be, yeah. We've actually had some customers that were buying a very cheap oil. It was the proper mix, but they had actually 5 products in a row in 1 month fail. This same failure. So by process of elimination, we figured it must be the oil. Customer swapped oil, quit having problems.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. So from a maintenance perspective, though, what else can they do to just keep things running well, running smooth?
So still on the topic of fuel, just keeping fresh fuel. A lot of people don't realize that after 30 days, fuel starts to degrade. It evaporates all the good stuff and leaves behind undesired things. So I always tell people, keep fresh fuel in your machines, keep fresh, clean fuel in your tanks. Make sure there's not debris in your tanks. The number one repair we probably do is replacing carburetors. It's not because the carburetors actually failed, it's because the fuel inside was bad and usually solidified inside the carburetor. You can't get that back out. But aside from fuel, there are a few other things. This here is actually an engine block of one of Steel's 4-cycle engines. It still runs 2-cycle mix for lubrication, but it does have valves inside to give it really good fuel economy. It helps with emissions while not sacrificing power, right? But you see all these cooling fins, that's how this bad boy stays cool.
Yes.
This engine runs very hot, has a fan that pulls air across this. Now this engine looks really clean. This is not how it'll look after a year of use.
Very true.
Most people never think about pulling all the plastic off of this engine to clean it, but that is actually very important for the life of this engine.
Because it's an air-cooled engine.
That's right. It's one thing we do here. If you bring a machine in for service, we're going to make sure that we clean these cooling fins. So it's something you don't ever see. You probably don't even know that we did it, but it's going to make your machine last a lot longer.
Perfect. Now, when it comes to on the machines, as far as how to run it, like I know a lot of folks and some of my guys do the same thing, and we have to work with them and get them to correct it. Though they have a fear of running things wide open.
Sure.
They like to feather it, think that they're every time they let off, they're giving that engine a break. What's the right way to do it?
Right. So it's like you think it'd be like your car where you don't floor it all the time. But these engines are not like your car. These engines are designed to run at one place. And that's usually at their maximum RPM, because it's assuming that if you're weed eating, you need a lot of power, and so Steel has designed them to run great at full RPM. There's nothing wrong with a blower, a weed eater, or an edger if you just lock down that throttle and let it go. At full speed, the fan is pulling the most air across the engine, so it's cooling really well. But inside the engine, what's really important is that the combustion is most effective at that point, because the air and the speed and the fuel are all mixed just right. If you let off and pull on throttle and let off and pull on throttle, well, now you're sending fuel and you're changing engine speed. Then you're sending fuel and you're changing engine speed. And the engine isn't able to match what the fuel consumption is happening there.
Yep.
So you're getting a very inefficient burn, and what usually happens is you don't burn all the fuel. That extra fuel can do a few things. The biggest thing is it builds up inside the engine, turns into carbon. That carbon does all kinds of bad things inside the engine.
Yep.
But the other thing it'll do is it'll clog your exhaust and can actually back up so bad that it'll soak your air filter with gasoline. So we recommend, even if you don't hold wide open throttle and maybe you only want half power, keep it at half throttle, but keep it there.
Consistent.
Keep the throttle consistent. Don't go up and down and up and down. You wouldn't want to do that in your car either.
Very true. Very true. Now, when we're talking more about weed eaters, a lot of companies and maybe individual homeowners, but then my guys like to do it as well. They'll either take these shrouds off or they change that. What can be the downside there? What should they avoid doing?
Sure. So this is off of a steel string trimmer, and this guard here, you can see it's got its cutter right there. And as this line comes out, that cutter cuts it off at just the right size. If you remove this guard, there's nothing to prevent that line from going further. Mm-hmm. That's going to put extra load on the engine. I know this line doesn't look very big, but when it's spinning very fast, it does have wind resistance.
Yep.
And that wind resistance is what's going to load down the engine. Or if you're cutting weeds, it's going to create more load. Essentially, it would almost be like putting really big tires on your car.
Yes.
And if you don't modify the rest of the car, it's not going to be good for the car to have oversized tires. It's going to put a lot of strain on the engine. And that's actually what happened. We've actually had some pistons that look like this in a really short time because of this. Because it completely changes the way the engine's working, usually increases heat a lot.
So Still's put a lot of time and research into decide like this distance is the perfect distance for this to the engine ratio. That's or load correct. Or whatever. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So
There's
important.
a lot of science between how fast this engine is going, what temperature it's going, what fuel mixture it has, and what type of load is on there. Now, if you don't like this setup, Steel does have other options. There's all kinds of different attachments. There's blades, metal blades. There's poly blades. There's even different line heads that you can put different thicknesses of line. But that's the thing is, it's not just removing the guard that can be bad. If you were to put an unauthorized gear head on, or a trimmer head on the bottom here, maybe something that had too thick of line, the thicker line is also going to cause issues. Or if the blade that you put on there isn't balanced or is too heavy, you could also have some issues with that.
So how far, I mean, most people are going to think, take this off, they're going to eyeball it, it's about to that length. If you're only getting like an inch or 2 inches longer, I mean, you're already having an effect on that motor, right?
It is. Steel, I don't remember the exact numbers, but Steel did some research, and I believe an inch out, just an inch, which you probably wouldn't even notice while you're using it,
right,
is going to increase those engine temperatures somewhere around 50 to 70 degrees. And when we're talking about an air-cooled engine, that's a lot of temperature.
So it's going to wear on that thing pretty fast then. All right, and while we're here talking about two-cycle engines, actually, ironically enough, this is not a two-cycle engine, right?
So it is and it isn't. Steel calls it a 4-mix. And the reason why they call it that is because there's still no separate sump where the oil sits. You don't ever have to change the oil. You don't ever have to add oil. It burns two-cycle mix, sucks it right through the carburetor, just like a two-cycle engine. But it does run on 4 cycles. The biggest thing is it has valves. And what these valves do is allow Steel to meet emission standards while still having a very versatile engine. It can run upside down, runs very high RPM, lasts a long time, has lots of power, very small, but those valves help it meet emissions. Now,
so it just burns cleaner? It burns cleaner than a 2-cycle?
It does. It burns much cleaner than a 2-cycle.
Okay.
It also gets better fuel economy. It's not going to use as much fuel. But what that means for the consumer is these valves, like an old car, they need adjustments every now and then. And most people don't realize that because they think it's just a 2-cycle engine.
Yep. What could that affect though if you're not staying on top of that? How often should you adjust, and what's the downside of not?
Most of my pros are going to need to do it at least once a year, but under heavy use it could be more than that. A lot of times you'll start getting, the symptoms can be hard to start, erratic running behavior, and loss of power. So that's usually when people bring them to us. But sadly, usually by that point, it's already started doing damage. As the valves get out of adjustment, they start changing the timing, starts changing how the engine is consuming the fuel. So like we talked about earlier with carbon buildup or heat gain and loss, if the engine's not running on the timing that it was designed, then it's not running properly.
Okay, so and then these type motors, like on Still specifically, we find them on what things? On which pieces?
Steel has it on most of their string trimmers. They do have an old-fashioned two-stroke option, but most of their string trimmers are going to be the 4-mix engine as well as their backpack blowers.
Okay.
Those are the two big places.
Okay, and there are other brands out there that do it. It's not just Stihl, right? Correct. Just because of emissions and trying to meet those standards.
Everyone's done it a little bit differently, but the 4-stroke engine in general is more efficient, more environmentally friendly than a 2-stroke, and so most companies have had to adapt this way.
Okay, very good info. So if you don't want to get into adjusting your valves and things like that, then you come and see this gentleman at Nichols and let them do it so that we don't break or bust our things and keep things running perfectly, right? Now, speaking of these mix engines, these 4-cycle mix engines, which pieces do not have it, Jason?
So one place you're never going to find it, or not now anyway, is in a Stihl chainsaw. And it's mostly because chainsaws need to be as small, compact, and as light as possible. So they don't want to add a valve train in there. You just want an old-fashioned, high-revving 2-stroke engine. Now, there's no valves to adjust in there, but there's still plenty of maintenance that needs to be done on these.
Yep.
The biggest thing, and it's the simplest thing on a chainsaw, is keeping your chain sharp. A lot of people don't realize that a chain can dull in as little as 20 to 30 minutes, depending on what you're cutting. If you're cutting really hard wood, it's going to dull it really fast. If you're cutting soft wood like pine, you might have a little bit longer. But what I tell people is a chain should always provide saw shavings. Think of like an old-fashioned pencil sharpener where there's nice curly cues coming off of it. If you've got sawdust, you need to stop. A chain should never give you sawdust. If it's got sawdust and the chain is dull, you need to sharpen it or replace it. The reason why that's important is this chain is the only thing that provides a load for the engine. If there's no load, it would be like putting your car in neutral and flooring it. It's not going to like that for very long.
Very true.
So by keeping the chain sharp, the engine has the proper load to keep the RPMs right where it needs to be. If you don't do that, the RPMs can go higher, the temperature can go higher, and you can actually destroy the piston.
Okay, very good point. Now, I have heard from a reliable source, right, that loosening the chain when you're done using it is good for chain life.
That's correct. Yeah. So
it was Jason told me that 5 minutes ago, by the way.
You constantly have to tighten a chain during use. That's just normal. It's hot metal and it's going to stretch. And so Stihl has a nice easy chain adjuster that you can do that. But the thing is when you're done, you make the last cut, your chain is still tight and it's hot. So if you set it in the garage and walk away, that tight hot chain is just going to keep stretching. So when you're done with that last cut, loosen up that chain and then put it in the garage and you'll get a lot longer chain life.
Now, should this also apply to like pole saws and things as well? Or because our guys are really good at tearing the heads of those up. And our guys are also really good, if you're watching Carl specifically, at tearing up these chainsaws. So to avoid burning them up and running them right, just you need to know the right way to cut it, right? I mean, you should be doing cuts for how long before you kind of give this thing a break and let it cool down some?
It really depends on the saw. If you want a pruning saw like this little bad boy right here, this is not a saw that's designed to cut all day. It will, but this is a pruning saw. It's designed for cutting nice small branches, and it'll do that for years and years. If a pro grabs this and wants to go out and just cut a giant oak tree up, the little saw is going to do it, but it's going to really put some work on it. If you move up to a bigger saw, Stihl calls this a firewood saw, is what in the description they call it, because if you're cutting firewood all day, it's going to do it. It's not going to have a problem just sitting there all day cutting that firewood. And really the saw is going to be okay as long as you're paying attention to your chain, making sure your fuel's good, making sure your air filter's clean, and you also want to make sure that all of your cooling fins, just like we talked about on this engine, the cooling fins, these cooling fins can get clogged with sawdust and dirt and all kinds of things.
And you run the whole gamut, right? The things from the pros to things that an individual homeowner. Can you touch on some of those and the price difference?
Stihl kind of has three categories. We have what we call the home use saw, and these are great for people that just need to prune some shrubs, or maybe if there's after storm cleanup and you're just doing some occasional cleaning. Then they move over to this area which we would call like the farm or ranch use. So still not in the pro category, but still designed for some extensive use. If you own a farm, you're going to be using your chainsaw pretty often. So these saws not only have the power, but also have the longevity. They're going to work for years to come. Now, if you're a pro, What that means is that you're probably using this saw all day, every day, in
Right.
some really rough conditions. So these are the Pro Series saws, and they are designed to typically be lighter and more powerful at the same time.
Okay.
So that's one thing for a pro is he doesn't want anything heavy because he's holding it all day, and he wants as much power as he can get because he wants to be done with the job. So these saws, not only do they offer much more power than what's in the farm and ranch category, but you can see here they also offer a lot larger sizes. This is a 36-inch bar on the MS661. Still not the biggest saw they make. That's a very popular machine.
That is serious, Jason. All right, guys. Yeah. So if you need an extremely large chainsaw, you can get that here. Or for any of your equipment needs, can you let them know your number to get you?
Absolutely. Our phone number is area code 904-641-2922, and we are located at 10237 Beach Boulevard.
So if you want to keep your equipment running well, if you don't want to take the time to, do the things, adjust valves, clean everything for the air-cooled engines and all that good stuff, bring it to these guys and they'll get you set up. Or if you just want an obscenely large and to be the coolest person on your block, you can get this boy too. Till next time, guys. I'm Chad Lakin, Operations Manager at Earthworks. Earthworks Jacks providing lawn maintenance, fertilization, and pest control throughout Northeast Florida. Give us a call at 996-0712 or reach us on the web at earthworksjacks.com.